All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Social Psychology. Let me go ahead and make sure everything looks like it's going okay. I think my sound seems all right. So, yeah, thank you guys for joining me for our June 19th live stream. I'm excited this week. I can tell like the pressure's off in kind of a big way because there are fewer panicked sounding questions about an exam and an assignment and more just kind of like easygoing questions. I'm kind of excited. There are a number of questions about kind of stuff I've been into lately, and I'm happy to share that with you guys. So get to know a little bit more about me and what's going on, and yeah, no, I'm excited to share this stuff with you. I think a lot of times, I think about how I'm into the kind of stuff that's often thought of as being like niche stuff or nerdy stuff or inaccessible stuff. And I think one of the things that I find most exciting is when I have an opportunity to introduce something that I love to somebody that I'm excited to share it with too. I wanted to tell you guys, I thought this was really good. Recently, over the quarantine, my mom, like a lot of your family members, I have a feeling, but my mom wasn't able to work. She was not considered an essential employee. She was at risk, so she was stuck at home and going kind of crazy with it. And so I suggested, has she ever thought about like playing a video game? Now it helps that she had heard a story about Animal Crossing on NPR, but after a relatively short conversation, I was surprised to learn that she was willing to try Animal Crossing. She ordered a Nintendo Switch and the game, and I mean, what would for me be an eternity later, but the game got delivered, and she started getting into it. My brother and I, we kind of tag teamed, helping my mom with the video game, learning how to run it, learning what to do, and she played it a little bit. And I mean, this was stunning for me because my mom is somebody who, as long as I can remember, she has used terms like drivel and waste of time to refer to video games, something that for me is probably like my longest lived hobby, which real good for self esteem in that. But I was really surprised she got into playing it, and I checked out her account the other day to see like has she still been going, and sure enough, she had. But I asked her how long she thought she had been playing, like how many hours she'd put in, and she had a hard time figuring out exactly how long. It's hard to figure out how much time you put into something, but um, I asked her if she had an idea of how much time she had put into this game, and she said, I don't know, maybe like 20 hours, 40 at the most. And I had to tell her like she'd spent nearly 200 hours on this game. And even she was shocked. She had to recognize the irony here that, something that she'd always thought of as, I think the best summary she told me is it's a way for kids to waste time when there's something else they should be doing. And I was excited to see that, like, no, actually she can get into it and it's not just a waste of time. And I had the opportunity to share something I really love with somebody I never thought I'd be able to share it with. So as I make recommendations with you guys, like I'm going to try to share some of my favorite things related to the questions you guys had, and of course answer course related questions too. But I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite books and video games and TV shows based on questions that have been asked here. If you get a chance, hit me up and let me know what you think about these things. If you get a chance to try them out, watch an episode or leaf through a couple of pages, let me know, and then let me know what you think and let me know about your favorites. I'd love to know some of your favorite musical choices and videos and movies and stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start with class business, and then we'll wrap up with kind of a slate of kind of personal stuff here. I've got a couple of questions about the most recent and upcoming research and analyze assignments. The first one feels like it's the perennial question, but I never get tired of answering it here. When will the research and analyze grade be put into Canvas? And the shortest answer is not yet. I'm finishing grading your second test with the essays on there. I'm really happy with the development I've seen there. Everybody's doing a really good job of using terms. And one of the biggest things that I'm happy to see is a lot more like explicit definitions of terms, right? So one of the biggest things you can do to be successful in these essays is to not assume that I think you know what you know. So when you use a term, always make sure you bring in a term and then you immediately define it and find a way to apply it and connect it together. But that's like the biggest stuff. Just make sure you use all the terms, you define it really clearly, and that you write an essay. On the first test, a couple of people, instead of writing an essay, provided bullet points. But if you just turn that thing into an essay, you earn yourself a couple right there. Once I'm done with that, I'll be moving on to the research and analyze. I go ahead and back burner that one a little bit, mostly because it's going to be a while before your next research and analyze assignment. If you're just like raring to go on the next one, take a chance to do this week's participation assignment, where I ask you to engage with another student lingo lesson and think a little bit about the Jello related discuss the general education learning outcome, which is information literacy. Asking for some tips on research and analysis. This is the next question. What are some tips to help us on our next research and analyze assignment? The biggest thing is to really think about what the assignment asks you to do. I haven't looked at submissions for the first one, but one of the biggest missteps that students make on this first assignment is that they, well, write a paper about themselves, which in and of itself isn't bad, but that's not really the goal of the assignment. You want to think about what the assignment is really asking you to do. And in the end, if you think about it, especially in the context of the class, what I'm asking you to do is demonstrate an ability to think critically about yourself. So, like, if I use the example of I think of myself as a generous person, I want to demonstrate that ability to think critically by not just saying, these are all the stories about me that show that I'm a generous person. I might tell a couple of those stories, but also talk about like why those are particularly salient ones, how they support my existing self schema, how through self enhancement theory, we explain that it's part of me seeing myself as positively, right? So in that way, like I want to see that kind of critical thinking and then also a critical evaluation of your sources, right? And this first assignment was kind of like I wanted to see your ability to read these sources critically and show that you wouldn't just buy whatever they were selling without asking you to do any real like academic research. Just pull from your own experiences, from the things that you yourself have created. On this next assignment, you are going to do some research. You're going to go out there and find sources, and you're going to show me your ability to look at those sources and not just buy what they're selling, like on the face of it, that just because you find an online article that says one thing, it doesn't mean that you should buy that at face. So that's going to really be the key. You want to ask yourself, like, there's a reason I'm not giving you a research and analyze paper where I say, research a topic in social psychology and find out a lot about it, and then tell me that you know something about it. Like, that's not interesting for you or for me. Finding a new way to apply this, right, and think critically, you can do something new and show me that you have that ability to do that new thing, like really think critically about these sorts. So you always want to be focused. For doing well on these, you always want to be focused on analyzing the sources, analyzing your own perspectives, and bringing in course information. Think about where we are in the class at that point. This next one I think is about finding opportunities to shape other people or resist persuasion. So there's some cool stuff there. The other thing is probably the biggest thing. Give yourself time to work on these assignments. They take time. I'm not asking you to just bang out an essay and turn that bad boy in. I really want to see stuff in there. So giving yourself time to work on it will make sure that you not only have the ability to polish it well, but also that you can like think critically in the process as well. So our next question related specifically to this week's information on relationships, I'm going to guess that the question asker here has had an opportunity to watch at least one video or listen to a podcast episode. And they say, how do expectations undermine relationships? I mentioned this in the introduction for this week's material, or I think it was in the introduction here. And I mention it because it was one of my favorite things that Robert Sternberg talks about in his interview in the podcast. If you haven't had a chance to listen to the podcast yet, it is really good. It's super informative and really helpful for anyone who's in a relationship to listen to an interview with somebody who is kind of like the leading, probably the most impactful researcher on relationships ever, right? And to hear what he has to say. And one of the things that I love is he doesn't approach it from a perspective of like, some people are relationship ready and other people aren't. That if you're having a problem in your relationship, it's because one of you has an issue. It's more like the relationship is about people who are in it together. So when there's an issue, it's because not that anyone's doing anything bad, but there's just a mismatch. So one of the ways that he explains it is that like if you go into a relationship with a different set of expectations from the person you're in it with, you're going to have issues, not because your expectations are unrealistic, though they might be, right? You might expect that your partner is going to give up all of their individually developed interests so that they can do everything that you want to do, and they're not going to have anything to themselves ever again, right? Like this is a common thing that we see in people who have attachment concerns or maybe suffer from borderline personality disorder, right? That they connect very, very deeply with other people, but want that person to let go of a lot of what makes them them. That might be unrealistic and it's connected with like a personality disorder. But generally speaking, if you have an issue, it might be because you and the other person have different expectations. Maybe you want to have a more physically intimate relationship and they want to have one that's more emotionally intimate. Maybe you want to be, connected really close together a lot, but they really want their space. Maybe you're looking for something like down the line, like marriage or kids, and they're not. And if you have that mismatch, the relationship probably isn't going to hold together as long as you'd like. But that's not because one of you's bad and the other one's good. It's just that you have expectations that don't match up. The one example I did talk about in this week's material about expectations really undermining things is if you have unrealistic expectations in terms of like true love and soulmates. It turns out that people who have those expectations are much less likely to be happy in their relationships and more likely to break up or get divorced. And that's because their expectation of what a relationship isn't grounded in reality. Because we all know like soulmates get together because fate wants them to be together and they stay together because they're happy all the time. And if you ask like, what do they argue about? Well, if you're someone who believes in soulmates and true love, you'd say, well, we don't argue because we're meant to be together. You don't fight because you're meant to be together. And that unrealistic expectation means that if you're in a real relationship with someone, you have an argument or you have a fight and you have these bad feelings, you're more likely to say, like, well, this must not be my true love and move on from it. Okay? It's just not very likely you'll be in a relationship with somebody where you don't ever disagree. And I think, even Robert Sternberg would say disagreements are normal and natural and really a good thing because it means you're both comfortable sharing with each other. Anyways, I pulled that podcast episode. The Love Drive is not a podcast I normally listen to, but I love that episode so much. I just couldn't wait to share it with you guys. So I put it on there. You should give it a listen. Absolutely 100. So moving on from course information there, I'm really excited, by the way. I love this week's material because it's all about like getting rid of our preconceived notions about things and looking at the ugly truth in order to make stuff better. Next week's really good because it's all about that ugly truth of how we shape other people, and it can be kind of fun. As far as personal questions, I've got a few of these here. The first one says, I notice a ton of books behind you. I am also a book nerd. What is your favorite psychology book or regular book? Well, here's the thing. I got to tell you guys, I'm cheating more than a little bit because even though I've got a handful of books that I can grab kind of easily here, I've got Norse mythology, I have the Extreme Teen Bible, and what? I've got a couple of other gifts that people gave me. Don't ask me why one of my friends gave me The Art of Seduction. I'm not sure what he was thinking, that maybe I needed some help on that. But almost every single one of these books is not mine. It is instead my wife's. Psychologists generally are not big on books for their like format of choice. We tend to stick to publishing journal articles, whereas historians are much more like books. And a lot of these books are books that my wife read. She mined for information in her graduate studies, especially in her qualifying exams, preparing for her dissertation. I mean, it's an incredible number of books to read over the course of a handful of years. But I mean, it's really incredible. Everything she knows about history, social history, economics, ecology. There's a lot of really cool stuff on environmental justice, injustice, and racism. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. And even though I've been lucky to learn a lot from here, I was looking for a. Oh, there is one big section of the bookshelf that I've used up. These are not psychology books, but these are my Dungeons and Dragons like rule books and content books. I think like a lot of people who own D&D books, I don't get the opportunity to play nearly as much as I would like to. I create characters and drop campaigns that will never get used and we'll never have the time for. I'm hoping that maybe once Grady's old enough, we'll get to play a little bit. But one of my big recommendations, if you're looking for something to do and you're still in quarantine, if you have not played Dungeons and Dragons before, there are free supplements online. The basic rules and the basic monster manual and dungeon master's guide are available for free from Wizards of the Coast. You can do more with the official books, but if you've never tried it, it's a blast. It's not just for nerds. It's collaborative storytelling that's a lot of fun and really cool. I've gotten a chance to play with my brother and my dad and my wife and my in-laws. I think Grady's about the only person I haven't lassoed into it, but but there will be time for that. As far as my favorite psychology book, I've got a few recommendations here, and really, I don't have psychology specific books, but I've made the recommendation before. Outliers and The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell are two of my favorite books on human stuff, like ever. So, a book that I recommend a lot, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky, is another one that I really, really like. They're well known for taking these complex ideas and making them really approachable. I also, for psychology stuff, like I really like Mindset by Carol Dweck and Whistling Vivaldi by Claude Steele. These are really big if you're into mindset stuff. But, I'm somebody, I really enjoy reading fiction if I'm looking for something that I want to enjoy reading. And, so a couple of things I'd recommend. I would recommend American Gods by Neil Gaiman, which is a really fantastic book. That was the first one by him that I ever read. And then I've been going back and reading some old Isaac Asimov stuff. I'm really into what's called speculative fiction, and I'm really excited to get into that. If you're like a lot of people though, and you don't have a chance to read books or even short stories, um, I I I can't recommend enough listening to podcasts. There's a really fantastic podcast in fact called LeVar Burton Reads. I think if I was going to recommend a podcast to anybody, that would be the one. LeVar Burton Reads is exactly what it sounds like. It's actor LeVar Burton. He was in a Star Trek show a long time ago, Next Generation, as a character named Geordie LaForge. But he also was the host of a show that I watched every single day when I was a kid called Reading Rainbow, in which he read children's books for kids to like enjoy. And that's how I got exposed to a lot of books as a kid, and I loved it. And he's got this beautiful reading voice. And a few years ago, he kicked off LeVar Burton Reads as he just built it as Reading Rainbow for grown-ups, and it's fantastic. In fact, it's how I ended up exposed to Neil Gaiman's work. He read one of Neil Gaiman's short stories. Um, so yeah, if you haven't listened to LeVar Burton Reads, it's great for when you're doing chores, when you're taking care of stuff around the house, doing some yard work, when you're driving, or just chilling and doing something else. He's got again a beautiful reading voice and picks a lot of really good fiction. Um, Next question. Did I ever? Oh, also related books. Did I ever consider pursuing a career in literature since I seem to enjoy it so much? Is it something I'd be interested in? I'd say I never considered a career in literature as much as I enjoy reading, and I did before. I think something I never liked was classes. Even though the English or the literature classes that I took, I found it so distasteful to read because I had to. And what I found is that there were books like Catch 22 or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that I'm sure my teachers picked because she thought that there were people like me who would like them. I refused to read it out of spite. I hated every moment of it. And then I came back and read it as a grown up and absolutely loved them. So I never considered a career in it or even really took literature classes in college, but it's something I really wish I had done. If you're looking for ways to fill those electives, a lot of students get laser focused on career paths and taking classes they need for those careers. And I really can't recommend enough that you take classes outside of that comfort zone and broaden your perspectives. Because, I mean, yeah, maybe you'll end up changing your mind about what you want to do with your careers, but also maybe you'll just like read a book that's really cool or get exposed to an idea that's great. I wish I'd taken literature classes in college. I wish I'd taken art history and economics to really just, I mean, in a lot of ways, if you're pursuing, in particular, if you're pursuing an AA or moving on to a bachelor's now, this is maybe like your last chance ever to take classes just because until you're like retired and taking them at or on Zoom 2.0 or whatever if this whole deal ends up continuing. So yeah, no, I'm always excited to recommend stuff that's fun to read, but I think the biggest thing is like you should never feel embarrassed about reading stuff you enjoy reading. I love reading young adult fiction because it's fun and it's enjoyable and it's predictable. And if there's something you enjoy doing, there's no reason to feel bad about it. What aspect or topic of social psychology do you love the most? I think my favorite thing I love about social psychology is that it shows us that what we think the world is not what the world is, and who we think we are is not who we are. It lays bare all of our biases and mental shortcomings, making it clear that we can't trust ourselves in being confident about how the world works. That so often we write off other people, assuming we know why they do what they do, when in fact we don't, right? It says we need to walk a mile in their shoes, give people the benefit of the doubt, and understand that as distasteful as a person might be, they are that person because of the situations they found themselves. Who's your favorite musical artist that you're currently listening to right now? Um, I guess I've got a handful of artists that I really like to recommend. If you're interested in stuff that's more accessible, I've got two really great artists I love to recommend. The first one is The Format. The Format is a group that's not around anymore, but if you remember the song We Are Young by Fun, Fun, the frontman of Fun is Nate Ruess, and he was part of the duo called The Format, which like we accidentally, my wife and I ended up being really big into in the mid to late 2000s. That they opened at a show for somebody that my wife really liked. She got their CD like at their merch table, and then we put it on repeat for like years. The Format, especially their album Dog Problems, is so good. And if you enjoy that, their first album of Fun, which is called Aim and Ignite, is really similar to it. The second album the second album by Fun was produced by Kanye and took a totally different turn, which I'm not saying it's bad. It's just really different from the first one. So Dog Problems by The Format, and then Aim and Ignite by Fun is really good. I've also been big into Vampire Weekend recently. They were another one we hit like in the mid to late 2000s, and then I just fell off of. And their album called Father of the Bride, their most recent one, has roughly 1,000 songs on it, and they're all like heat rocks. They're all excellent. Um, Beyond that, like I've got a lot of like when I say nerdy niche stuff, like there are a number of artists that I'm into. When I'm working and stuff, I really like listening to chiptune. In particular, I like stuff by Game Chops. Danny B or Danny Baranowski is probably my favorite chiptune artist. And if like chiptune is like video game EDM kind of stuff. But he did music for a number of games that you might be familiar with if you're into kind of like the indie game scene. Like Super Meat Boy is probably his well known, but he's done a lot of really good stuff. If you haven't listened to Danny Baranowski or Danny B, his stuff is really good. Um, Let me see here. What's my favorite thing about my dogs? Can I tell you a bit about them? So, um, I was not traditionally a dog person. I always thought about myself as a cat person until when I met my wife. They had a boxer named Roxy, and ever since then, I was a really big fan of dogs. And it's been tough over the last little over a year. We've lost all of the dogs that we had, which is really tough because I was never really a dog owner. I loved my wife's family's dog Roxy. That was many years ago, but our dog Ruger was really like my best friend for 10 years. Absolutely, we were inseparable. We got him at around the same time I left graduate school, and I had a part-time job for the first time ever. I had a ton of time, and Ruger and I, we just like went everywhere together. We'd jump in the truck and go to the store. We'd go to the park, and we just like it's incredible all the places you figure out that you can take your dog when you have one. So I think my favorite thing about our dogs was like having this built-in buddy who was there with you all the time. I'm not exaggerating when I'd say we were together for 20 hours out of the day every single day for 10 years. And it's been tough not having him around. And I was really hoping we get more time with him and Grady, but I'm really glad for the time we did have. And of course, we might consider another pup in the future. But if you've been a dog, a cat owner, a bird lover, you know that nobody will ever like replace one. That's always tough. One of the things that was really cool is I spent a lot of time with Ruger doing obedience training, like competitive obedience stuff. We never competed, though we did a lot of training. And one of the things that was really fun to see was when we trained on stuff like that, like doing training on tricks, it actually made him a way better listener and way more responsive in other situations too, because he was just so used to doing it. Even though we trained a lot of stuff that we'd never do in the real world, like that paid off later. And that's something that's actually become really informative in thinking about being a parent of Brady. That if I make the mistake that I know my parents made, that I know a lot of parents make, and I only expect him to behave himself in public, he never will. That we have to work together at home to behave ourselves well, so that when we're in public, it's not this big different situation. We're coming down to the end here. I got another couple of questions, but I wanted to stick in here because I've got a number of really good recommendations. I'm excited for you guys. What was my favorite class in college? I think my favorite class in college was the one that got me into the field of psychology that I was in graduate school, called Sensation and Perception. We don't have a sensation and perception class at Santa Fe, but if you go to UF or USF or UNF or FSU, you'll absolutely find a number of classes in S&P there. Sensation and perception is all about how the world around us is not the one we think it is. And in particular, this class was really cool because the guy who taught it, he taught us about hearing using a piano. He taught about colors using historic works of fine art. And a lot of it he taught us about through his own research in animals, understanding how other animals like manatees, dolphins, and bats perceive the world very differently from how we do. If you want to know more about that, Sensory Exotica is a really excellent book about the experiences of other animals and what their sensory worlds are like. That, there are animals that, again, perceive the world as a wholly different thing than we do. And that's something that shows me much how, like, our biases get in the way of seeing who we are and who other people are. Our sensory systems make us perceive a world that isn't there at all. Our last question here: what are some of your favorite TV shows and movies? I'm actually a really bad recommender for TV shows and movies generally because we don't get a lot of time to watch them. Over this last summer, I did something that I had been looking forward to doing for a while. Since I wasn't sleeping, I was up all night with Grady. My wife was too. But since we were up all night, I binge watched every Marvel movie, and like, yeah, they were fun, and they were actually like really good. I expected to like them, but I liked them a lot more than I expected to. But like that's the sort of thing I just don't get a ton of time. As far as TV shows though, I think the biggest thing I can recommend, I love TV shows that have like a real strong sense of place and style. Some of this comes from really strong writing, but so much of it comes from filmography and color and sound. I love a really fantastic scape. And if you're looking for some shows that give you that sense, a couple of like easy to get into recommendations that you guys have probably been into. A really one that's really big right now is Avatar: The Last Airbender. I missed that when like it was first popular. I was busy being a really big snob about the fact that it wasn't real anime. It's a super strong show. It's really well written. It's really interesting in terms of how it portrays things like culture. It deals with diversity in this way that like it demonstrates. I think there was one writer who described it as a world without whiteness. Right, there is no like default major race, which is really cool, and they deal with like ethnicity and gender and culture in a really cool and interesting way. But one of the things that I love is you get this overwhelming sense of what the world that Avatar takes place in is like, who the people are, what the cultures are like, what the food is like, what the dress is like. There's this really great attention to detail for that. Another really great show for a sense of place is The Mandalorian, and the soundscape was really fantastic. The direction was really good. The fact that for like 99.9% of this show, the main protagonist was faceless, and yet you got a really great sense of who they were. Like that's some real style working out really well. Not surprisingly, for like style and color and setting, you get a lot of this from animated stuff. I love to watch anime in part because of this. If you've got good recommendations on great uses of color and style and animation in particular, I'd love your recommendations. But some of my big ones, last year Netflix released that like the compilation series Love, Death, Robots. If you haven't watched Love, Death, and Robots, it's very good. As a whole, it's very good. There are some episodes that are kind of thinkers. There are some that are really over the top good. Some of them deal with traditional anime kind of stuff, but again a really fantastically stylishly well done series. Their sci-fi series Altered Carbon is really good for this too. For anime in particular, I'm down with really pretty much anything done by Studio Trigger. Their stuff is really off the wall, and they crank it up to 11 in a way to like mock other anime series in a big way. They go over the top with things like sexuality and violence sometimes to make that point, but it's always done incredibly stylishly. Netflix, I think, has both of their series, Gurren Lagann and Kill la Kill, that have really got me into them. And they have a new series coming at the end of June called BNA, which I'm really stoked about. It's wild because it seems to be kind of like a big, like, furry focused show, which isn't something I've really engaged with so far. But I could tell immediately. I watched the trailer today. It showed up on my Netflix thing, and I'm like, I knew right away it was Studio Trigger. It's like It's like anything by Studio Ghibli. You know, it's Studio Ghibli, like My Neighbor Totoro, or oh, what's the one? Spirited Away, right? You just or Princess Mononoke. You know, the last set of recommendations I want to make, I was thinking about in general the stuff with my mom and how much we write off whole segments of culture, saying that we're not like about that stuff. This is part of why in your introductions I wanted you guys to share music you were in, because there's so many of us that are like, well, I don't really get into hip hop, or I don't like country music, or I don't like classical music. And I love to see such a great mix of stuff. Right? And so I really want you guys to be able to share with each other and see these things. But one of the things that I feel like it's becoming big now, but still a lot of people have a block about, are video games, interactive entertainment. And so I was going to make a couple of recommendations there. If you know somebody who has a Switch and you haven't tried Animal Crossing, it's a fantastic way to get into trying a video game. It's really stylish and accessible and enjoyable, and there's none of the like pressure of failure that I think so many people feel. Like one of the reasons a lot of us don't engage with new stuff like a video game is it's like you're going to perform and you're going to fail and you're going to feel like you're bad at stuff, and there is no failure state here, which is really cool. um you know, there's a lot of this good stuff that I could keep talking about, but if you're interested in more recommendations, you know, hit me up and let me know. And of course, feel free to share your recommendations. As always, if you have any questions about the class, about psychology, about anime and video games, or Dungeons and Dragons, if you're looking for another tabletop system to get into, just hit me up and let me know. You guys know that you can get me through email, Canvas messaging, you can text or call, you can talk to me during office hours or submit questions here, and I'll be more than happy to talk about them. Yeah, so I think that's it. Hit me up and let me know. But until I get a chance to talk to you again, I'm your Professor Ryan Keith. This is Social Psychology.